Nate and I were at his parents' cabin in Ontario. To celebrate the start of summer, we had both taken a week off of work and planned a 4-day vacation of nothing but hiking, biking, canoeing, and enjoying a break from our hectic lives in the city. I honestly don't remember much of the vacation itself. It was a lot of fun for sure, but we did so much of the same stuff that it all sort of blurred together. Whenever I think of that trip, the only thing I remember is that conversation. Probably because I want so desperately to forget it. We had finished a simple but tasty dinner of hot dogs and potato chips. We both wanted beers, but we had blown through what we had brought with us. It was raining with the occasional thunderclap. I thought it was peaceful. We were sitting in front of a roaring fireplace, working through a pot of coffee. It was dark and fairly late, but neither of us felt like going to bed, probably because of the coffee. So we ended up talking. The first few minutes of our conversation were nothing noteworthy, just small talk. Somehow, I have no idea how, the conversation turned to some of the weird animals that we had seen during the trip. Nate brought up how, while we had been hiking the day before, a snake had slithered across the trail, most likely startled by us. I had let out a very unmanly scream and jumped about a foot in the air. I chuckled and explained that I was afraid of snakes because when I was 9, my brother's pet boa constrictor had escaped its terrarium, made its way out of his bedroom, and it ate my pet hamster. My parents got rid of the boa and made my brother apologize to me, but I had been afraid of reptiles ever since. I said without exaggeration that walking in on that creature swallowing my still-kicking hamster was the scariest thing that I ever saw. Nate looked sympathetic, and he handed me a cookie from the package that we had been snacking on. We were silent for a minute, listening to the rain and fire, when I had asked the question, "What's the scariest thing that ever happened to you?" Nate seemed to freeze. I wondered for a moment if he hadn't heard me, and then I noticed that his coffee cup was violently shaking. The thankfully lukewarm at that point coffee, it had spilled all over his hands and onto the blanket in his lap. "Nate." The sound of my voice brought him back to reality. He sucked in a quick breath and noticed that his hand and blanket were soaked in coffee. He frowned and got up, swearing at the spilled coffee. I'm sorry, No man, I'm sorry. I didn't know you would, freeze up like that. You don't have to tell me if you don't want." "No." He was so blunt that it had surprised me. He had gotten rid of the ruined blanket. It was a cheap one anyway. Wiped off his hand and refilled his coffee cup. He came back and sat in his chair, facing me. We had been friends for years, but I had never seen him look so grave. It's been years since I thought of it. The scariest thing that ever happened to me. As much as I want to, though, I'll never forget it. Do you want to talk about it? No, but I will. I need to. Just remember something for me. I'm not making this up. I couldn't if I tried. This isn't some campfire ghost story that happened to my brother's friend, sister's mailman, or anything like that. I'm not making this up, okay? I nodded, and despite his warnings, my interest had tripled. He sighed and took a long sip from his coffee. He turned and faced the fire. He didn't look at me once through the story. I asked questions and he answered every one, but he never turned away from the fire. I was 17 and feeling like I was the king of the world. I had just purchased, with my parents' help, a used but nice red pickup truck. One of the prettiest girls in the school was my girlfriend. I had just gotten a letter of acceptance to my dad's alma mater. I thought things couldn't get any better. To celebrate, Sabrina, my girlfriend, our friend AJ, and a lot of our friends threw a party. I don't really remember it, but it's where I first heard about the old Raindrop Inn. The Raindrop Inn. Yep, some hotel back in the 1920s or the 1930s. No one knew the full story, but rumor had it the town founder had built the hotel for his wife, that it had been her dream to live in a hotel. On the opening night, however, the founder found his wife in their bedroom, fooling around with a bellboy. She screamed when she saw her husband, and apparently threw herself off the balcony. The founder never set foot in the hotel again, and later sold it to the highest bidder. It was open for another 20 years. During that time, 18 people died in it, most of them by their own hand, jumping off the balcony just like the founder's wife. A maid who saw one of them jump says that the guest screamed, "Leave me alone," into the bedroom before she had jumped off the balcony. When the maid had checked in, there was no one in the bedroom. Okay, but what about the other guests? The ones that didn't suffer the same fate? Only 5 of the dead guests didn't. I don't remember the other 2. But there was a couple that were found tied together in a full bathtub, fully clothed, with a plugged-in TV in there with them. The other was a 5-year-old boy who just disappeared. His mother told the police that she had tucked her son into bed and heard some terrible squealing noise after she had shut the door. She had described it as a sort of squeal of delight, and it wasn't from her son. She ran back in and he was gone. No body, no blood, nothing. Apparently, that was the last straw. The owner was sick of bad publicity and closed the place down. I learned all of this the night of that party. I didn't believe it and told the guys that they had told a nice ghost story. They got defensive and told me to go see it for myself if I didn't believe them. And then they told me where to find it. Everyone knew that it was just inside the forest behind the high school. I laughed it off and we continued to party, but I kept that story in my mind. The next night, Sabrina was over at my house. We were trying to watch a movie, but my little brother Pete wouldn't leave us alone. He kept saying that it was his turn for the TV, that he was going to tell Mom if we didn't hand over the remote. "Do you have a little brother?" I nodded, and then you probably know how I felt. I finally threw the remote down on the couch and went onto the porch with Sabrina. We were talking. She was suggesting that we go to her house to watch the movie. I forgot what exactly we were talking about though. Anyway, my mom walks out of the house and tells me that she needs to run out for a few hours. She was a vet and some butthole, her words not mine, had run over a dog. She told me that I was in charge for the night and asked Sabrina if she wanted to ride home. She said no and that we were going to finish our movie. Mom told me that she would be home by about 1 a.m., reminding me to watch Pete and then left. I told Sabrina that if Pete was going to be a pain and hog the TV all night, then I didn't really want to stay home. It was a Friday night, not to mention the start of summer. I told her that we should do something exciting, something cool. She asked me what I wanted to do. At that point, it was about 8 o'clock at night and a few places were closed. I thought for a second before I remembered the night before. I asked her if she had heard about the Raindrop Inn. Surprisingly, she hadn't. I told her what the guys had told me the night before. She listened but asked when I was done why I brought it up, and I told her that I wanted to go and see it. She laughed at me. Very funny. But I told her that I was serious. If it was as close as the guys at the party had said, then we could be there and back before my mom got home. She was quiet for a second and then started to look excited. She had always had a bit of fascination with urban legends, and I knew that it wouldn't take much convincing to get her to go to the old hotel. But then her face fell again. "You have to watch your brother, remember? There's no way that he wouldn't tell your mom." I cursed under my breath. She was right. If Pete knew what we were doing, he would want to come. The kid had read every Goosebumps book twice, and he loved scary stuff. If he came, he would ruin the fun, and if we left, he would tell Mom. But then I had an idea. When I was a kid, my dad got Pete and I into collecting those little Hot Wheels cars. I had kept up my collection even in my teenage years, and I had about 300 by that night. Pete had less than half of that, and he was seriously jealous of my collection. I had even caught him in my room once or twice, trying to steal the more impressive models. I told Sabrina that I knew what to do and went inside. Pete had turned the TV to one of those kids channels and got mad when I had paused it, but he heard me out. I told him that I would give him 50 of the cars from my collection, his choice, if he didn't tell Mom about Sabrina and I going out for a while. He agreed, but he asked where we were going. Just someplace some friends at school told me about. He seemed suspicious, but he nodded. He then turned back to the TV and pulled his favorite red baseball cap down to his eyebrows, signaling that the conversation was over. I went up to my room to grab a flashlight and a jacket, and then I came downstairs. The TV was off and Pete was gone. I assumed that he had gone to his room, and I went back to the porch. Sabrina was annoyed that I had taken so long, but then smiled and said that she wanted to go. I turned towards my truck, and I was halfway to the driveway when Sabrina told me to turn around. I had left the front door open. I pulled my keys from my pocket and shut the door and locked it, but I was confused. I was sure that I had locked the door on my way out the first time, hadn't I? I shook it off and then went to the car with Sabrina. It was barely 5 minutes from our house to the high school, but we wasted about 10 driving around, looking for the old, unkempt road that allegedly led to the Raindrop. Finally, I parked my truck and we both got out. I turned on the flashlight and we walked around. Finally, Sabrina spotted it. You wouldn't notice it from a distance, as a lot of grass had grown between the cracks, but there was a lot of really broken asphalt that made a trail leading into the woods. We looked at each other and we grinned. We were about to start when I heard a sound like a car door slamming. We both turned to my truck, but there was nothing there. I remembered then that I had unlocked it, and I pressed the button on the key fob. Sabrina, more eager now than ever, grabbed my upper arm and pulled me down the path. We walked for maybe 20 minutes before we had found it. We both sort of froze when it came into view. I don't think either of us had completely believed that it was real, but there it was. It looked like it had once been nice. It was 3 stories tall, and it must have been really well built if it was still standing after 70 years, 50 of them without any maintenance. But still, the age it did show. The building was being strangled by kudzu, with every window being broken or having no glass at all. The original color of the walls was impossible to guess, as the wind, rain, and time had turned them all an earthy brown. The roof was missing multiple tiles. There were massive cracks in the walls, and the front porch was sagging in. And to top it all off, we clearly hadn't been the first people to visit the place. Graffiti written in neon orange spray paint had been sprayed on several blank spots on the walls. Keep out, run, stay away, danger, that kind of stuff, like that was written wherever the artist could find space. We should have gone home right then and there. I was scared out of my mind, and judging by how tightly she was holding my hand, Sabrina was too, but we still wanted to go in. Maybe I was being stupid that night. Maybe I wanted to look tough in front of my girlfriend. I don't know. But we went in. The hotel was even creepier inside. At first glance, I thought it looked more like an old barn than an old hotel. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw that yes, it had been a hotel. There was the front desk, covered in mouse turds. There was the lobby bell, so rusty that it would never ring again. The half-eaten couch, the lopsided love seat, an upside-down chair had been the sitting area in the lobby. There was even a luggage cart buried under so many dusty cobwebs that it looked like a sheer white curtain had been draped over it. From holes in the ceiling, moonlight illuminated the room. "Well, this is inviting," Sabrina whispered. "You scared?" I whispered back, hoping that she would say yes so that we could leave. No, she responded, still whispering. I knew she was lying. You don't bury your fingernails into somebody's shoulder if you're relaxed. Are you scared? No, I lied. Why are we whispering? I don't know, she said, speaking normally. Do you want to try and go upstairs? I did not. What I wanted was to get out of there, make a beeline for the truck and go home, and wrestle away the TV remote from Pete. But I didn't want my girlfriend to think that I was a wimp. So I tried to look brave and I nodded. The stairs were in surprisingly good shape, considering the state of the rest of the hotel. We had to dodge cobwebs which hung from the ceiling of the stairwell like party streamers, but we didn't have trouble getting to the next floor. That's when things got really creepy. The first thing we saw when we got to the hotel's second floor was a lump in the middle of the floor. Sabrina glanced at me, and I walked over to the lump. I only took one look before jumping back in disgust. The lump was a rabbit, or it had been. It was dead, and I didn't have to be a doctor to see what had killed it. There was a hole in its chest the size of my fist. From the 2-second glance that I took, I could see that the rabbit's organs were all gone, and oddly enough, there wasn't even blood. The rabbit was nothing more than literal skin and bones. I didn't tell Sabrina this. I just said that the rabbit had been killed by something, and that we should probably go. She was clearly freaked out by the rabbit, even if she didn't know how bad it was. We might have left right then and there if we hadn't heard something. Footsteps. We both froze, and slowly turned to look at the door to the stairwell. Someone was coming up the stairs. I threw open the first door that I saw. The lock was so old that it fell off when I opened the door. I sort of hugged Sabrina to me and pulled her into the room. I closed the door as quietly as I could, hoping that whatever was coming up the stairs hadn't heard us in the hallway. We both heard the door to the stairwell open. We looked at each other and both put fingers over our lips. I've never seen Sabrina's eyes so wide, and I have a feeling that mine looked the same. We listened closely as the thing that had walked up the stairs began to walk slowly down the hall. I heard it stop at what must have been the rabbit. At that point, I realized that I heard a new noise. There were voices coming from the hallway. No, not the hallway. Those voices were coming from all over the floor. I wrapped my arms around Sabrina as we listened. From somewhere there came an inhuman squeal of delight, followed by the scream of a small child. From a bathroom somewhere up the hall, there was begging and screaming, followed by a violent splash and the unmistakable sound of electricity. A woman screamed, "Leave me alone," followed by a window shattering and a distant heavy thud. My already hammering heart rate accelerated when I realized what I was listening to. I remembered the story from the party, how a child had disappeared, a couple had been electrocuted, a woman had jumped off a balcony. We had just listened to those people die. Those sounds finally stopped, followed by what sounded like a sharp draw of breath from the hallway. I noticed then that the room was cold, eerily cold, especially for a night in late May, and it was quickly getting colder, like the source of the chill was moving up the hall. There was a sudden scream, and I was so rattled that I screamed and so did Sabrina. At that moment, instinct took over. I forgot about looking cool and just wanted to get out of there. I grabbed Sabrina's hand and charged through the door like a fullback. It was so old that I actually knocked it off its hinges as I ran. I caught a glimpse of some shapeless white thing. I didn't look any longer than that, and I charged for the door to the stairwell. Considering how fast I was running, I'm amazed that neither of us hurt ourselves as we rocketed down the stairs. Despite my panic, I noticed something in the lobby that I hadn't before. There was a pile in the corner, a pile of limp, furry bodies, and they all had holes in them. At that point, I didn't want to see any more. Still holding Sabrina's hand, I sprinted across the lobby, flew out the front door, and I tripped on the porch. We both landed face down on the forest floor. I didn't know or care if I was hurt. I immediately got up, clawing at the dirt to get friction. Sabrina was a few steps ahead of me, calling at me to keep running and to not look back. The screams were pouring from the hotel windows, screams of terror and pain. That was all the incentive I needed to pick up my pace. I ran so fast that night that I think I broke a few Olympic records. The second that we saw the truck, we both jumped in. I twisted the key and stomped on the gas. My truck broke the speed limit 3 times over as we made a break for my house. When the school was out of view, I slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. We took a minute to catch our breath. Sabrina was crying as she had been so scared, and honestly I was too. Nothing in my life had prepared me for that. I wondered how close we had come to disappearing or dying that night. We stayed in the truck for a while, trying to get a hold of ourselves and processing what had happened. Finally, we both felt stable enough to go back to my house. At that point, it was midnight and my mom would be home in an hour. I expected Pete to still be parked in front of the TV, and I remembered that I still needed to give him the cars that he wanted. At that moment, I was ready to give him my full collection. After that night, toy cars didn't seem important anymore. Sabrina went in first while I parked the car. I went in and saw that she wasn't there. I heard her upstairs and I went to make us a snack. I had just pulled out the chips and salsa when I heard her run down the stairs. I turned around with the chip platter smiling. She must have been hungry. But then I looked at her face, and that's when I saw how scared she was. She looked me in the eyes and practically shouted, "Where's your brother?" The tears started streaming down his face. Pete had hidden in the back of my truck. He had overheard what I had said on the porch about the hotel and he had gone with us. He had opened the front door. He had slammed my truck door. He was making the footsteps that we had heard on the stairs. And he was the one who screamed. I left him there. For a few minutes he was silent. I sat back stunned and I didn't know what to say. Finally he spoke again. A week later I went back to that hotel and I don't know why, closure maybe. As I drove up I saw it on the porch. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want it to be there. But it was. Pete's red baseball cap. He took a deep breath and finally looked at me again. And that's the scariest thing that ever happened to me. We didn't speak for the rest of the night. The fire was still blazing and the rain was still hammering down. But it wasn't peaceful anymore.